Hey everybody, hope you're having a great Friday. Today we're talking about something that really has been fascinating scientists, meteorologists, and astronomers for a very long time, and that is the weather on Mars. Mars is a planet, as you know. It's the next planet furthest from the sun. I don't know what words you guys use now in school to remember the planets, but when I was a kid, it was my very earthling mother just served us 9 pies. And my very earthling mother was Mars. And at the time when I was in school, Pluto was still considered a planet. Now Pluto has been discovered as no longer a planet. So now it would just be my very earthling mother just served us 9. Which doesn't make sense, but I'm sure there's other little things you use in school to try to remember the planets. Now, Mars is smaller than the Earth. It is much colder than the Earth, but the reason we've been studying it is a lot of studies have been done to determine if Mars can support life. Are there bugs on Mars? Are there ants on Mars? Could people ever live on Mars? And even if it's not possible now, maybe in the past. Was there ever life on Mars in the past? So we look at a lot of things. What do you need to survive? One of them is water. We're going to talk about water on Mars. The temperature, obviously. You need enough heat from the sun. So there's a lot of things that go into it. Today, we're going to be talking about the weather on Mars. So if this is interesting to you, please watch along, share it with any friends, post it and share with anyone who may be interested. One thing is Mars is a very cold planet. It is a lot colder than it is here on Earth. And that's because it's further from the sun. The closer you are to the sun, the warmer it's going to be. The further you are from the sun, the colder it's going to be. And on Mars, temperatures dip to as much as minus 225 degrees around the poles. Mars does have poles just like the Earth does. They do have some brief warm periods right over the equator. It can reach up to about 70 degrees for a brief time around noon. So they do have some warm spots on Mars. But there's a lot that goes into studying Mars, what the planet is made of, what the atmosphere is like, what kind of air is on Mars, and of course, how hot it gets on Mars. So that's what we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to compare Mars to Earth, the size, the density, the atmosphere, because all of those are important when you're looking at Mars, life on Mars, and the weather on Mars. So we are going to flip this camera around. We are starting today's World of Weather lesson. And again, we are talking about Mars and weather of Mars. So this is what Earth looks like. And then you see Mars next to it. What's the first thing you notice? You notice that Mars is smaller than Earth. In fact, Mars is 1/2 the diameter of Earth. Mars is also less dense than Earth. It only has about 11% of the Earth's mass. We talked about the distance from the sun. This is very important as well. Mars is about 50% further from the sun than the Earth. That means that Mars is getting less solar energy. Something else, Mars has 2 moons. Here on Earth, we have 1 moon. Mars has 2 moons. Now, some of the things that Mars and Earth have in common, we talked a little bit about this, but we both have polar ice caps. Also, both Earth and Mars have seasonal changes. So we actually have seasons and changing of seasons on Mars. Also, Mars has observable weather patterns. We also have weather patterns here on Earth, but we do have it on Mars as well. Mars is the 4th planet away from the sun. So my very earthling mother, you know how it goes, Venus, Earth, Mars, that is the order in distance from the sun. Now, something important to note is that our atmosphere is very different. And this really makes a huge difference when you're looking at sustainability of life on Earth. And the big reason for that is Earth, 78% of our atmosphere is made of nitrogen, 21% is made of oxygen, and then 1% is other gases. Whereas you look at Mars, it's 96% carbon dioxide. So it is completely different. Then you have the smaller gases, less amounts of argon, nitrogen, and other. The reason this is important is that the atmosphere of Mars is much thinner than the atmosphere on Earth. Now, what does that mean? That means that there is a much lower surface pressure. So on Mars, the surface pressure is 0.088 pounds per square inch. That is less than 1% of the PSI on Earth. So you don't have surface pressure. So what does that mean? Here's an example. It's basically the pressure of the Earth pushing on you, of the atmosphere pushing on you. For example, someone on Earth, let's say you weighed 100 pounds on Earth. If you were on Mars, you would only weigh 38 pounds because you don't have that added pressure from the atmosphere pushing on you. So a lot less pressure on Earth, on Mars, I should say. Another reason that's important is that prohibits the existence of liquid water at the surface of Mars. So because the surface is so much thinner, you have less pressure, that prohibits the existence of liquid water at the surface of Mars. So this is what it looks like on Mars. There's no oceans on Mars. And here on Earth, the ocean is a huge factor in our weather, in our patterns, and in our forecasting. When we talk about El Nino, La Nina, again, that influences our weather greatly. That has to do with the ocean water temperature. Hurricanes, they form over the ocean. The warm ocean water, that is what makes hurricanes form, and typhoons. Without oceans, it really impacts the water system, the ecosystem, and the weather patterns. So that is a huge difference. Now, some people have been studying to see if maybe in the past, was there water on Mars? Some studies suggest that the atmosphere was actually thicker in the past, and if it was thicker, then that could support some water on Mars. Again, nothing has been proven. They're still studying the surface of Mars. We actually have a weather station on Mars to tell us what the weather is on Mars. So we're still studying and learning a lot about this planet, but there is no water on Mars right now. But some studies suggest there could have been water in the past. And that's really the biggest question. If there was water in the past, does that mean there was some kind of life on Mars in the past, even if it's ants or bugs or anything that could sustain life, even algae? So something we do see on Mars, and we can actually see this with telescopes, really powerful telescopes, is Mars does have something that we call dust devils and dust storms. And we can observe these with telescopes. And you see the arrow pointing at that dust devil right there. And a lot of science has gone into this. It's still not understood exactly what causes them, but it is something that we watch because it does threaten the operation of Mars rovers. We have these rovers on the planet, and if you have these big dust devils, these dust storms, it could damage these Mars rovers, and obviously it costs a lot of money to get these weather stations and these Mars rovers onto Mars. So that could threaten those Mars rovers. So it's something we look a lot at. Now, this is really interesting. We actually have daily weather reports, and I'm going to show you the daily weather report, but daily weather reports from Mars. This really happens. Each day we know the high temperature, the low temperature. We actually have rovers. We talked about those Mars rovers. They are on the planet and they take daily measurements of the local weather. They also monitor changes in the atmospheric conditions. Again, we talked about the atmosphere was a lot thinner on Mars. And they help us track those dust storms that we just talked about. One of them is the ExoMars Surface Science Platform, and that is going to host a complete weather station. So we're just gathering as much information about this planet as possible because there is so much known as to Mars. And we want to know, in the past, was life possible on Mars? Was there water in the past on Mars? It's very foreign to us. So that's why we devote so much time onto looking at what's happening on other planets. Also, some suggest that there's also warming happening on Mars, perhaps global warming on Mars, and how would that impact planet Earth? So a lot goes into it. I do want to show you what it looks like because this is so neat. And this is a website you can go to on your own. And let me find it here. Here it is. This is actually from NASA. So let me flip this around. This is just a website that you can go to, and it's Mars weather. And I'm going to zoom out here so you can see the web page because you can look at it on your own. It is, can you see it? It's Mars mars.nasa.gov/insight/weather. So mars.nasa.gov/insight/weather. Okay, and this actually, that is what the Mars rover looks like. It's on Mars, and it gives us daily measurements. So for example, on May 5th, it says the high was 26 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it goes through the different dates, April 29th, April 30th, May 1st, May 2nd, May 3rd, and it goes through and tells you. And there you can see, look at the high temperature. Look how much colder it is on Mars opposed to planet Earth. 26 degrees Fahrenheit, 29 degrees Fahrenheit, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. So as you can see, it is obviously much colder on Mars than it is on the planet Earth. But look, even the winds. This is measuring the average temperature, the max temperature, the wind direction. So it's really interesting, all this information we are getting from Mars. Then it's on a graph here. You can see the 3-day weather report. So it's really interesting to see planet. Oh, and I just dropped you. That is, I apologize, half the diameter of Mars. It is 50% further from the sun than Mars. So it's obviously much colder. It has a completely different atmosphere than what we're seeing on Earth. And it's much colder than what we're seeing on Earth. So it's a lot of differences. And there are no oceans. There is no water on Mars. So it's pretty interesting that we're getting all this information and data about Mars. So if this is interesting to you, there's so much about science and astronomy and the planets and the stars and what's going on, what the planets are made of. Even the planet itself, when you go through the different layers, even Mars is made differently than Earth. So it's very fascinating. And because it's so far away, yet we can see it through a telescope and we can get devices on Mars, it is really fascinating. So that's today's lesson. It is weather on Mars. Yes, there is weather on Mars. There are ice caps on Mars, there are seasonal changes and observable weather patterns. And you saw it's cold on Mars, that's because it's further from the sun, but the winds change, there's dust devils just like there are on Earth. So there are some similarities, but certainly a lot of differences. And right now, no, life is not sustainable on Mars, but a lot of people have been studying if ever there was life sustainable on Mars. Let me know what you think. Go through, write down your comments, let me know what you think about Mars and life on Mars, and if you ever think there was life on Mars. That's today's weather, World of Weather. I hope everyone has a great weekend. It is Mother's Day weekend. Make sure you tell your mom you love her on Sunday, and join us next week because we have much more to learn about in our World of Weather. So I'll see you again on Monday at 1:15. Everyone stay safe, be happy, stay healthy, and have a great weekend.